Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Susan Corbett. I do custom quilting, and what I've got for you today is a beautiful quilt. It's very detailed, but it's busy. It's all these great Liberty of London prints and with a little bit of hand embroidery, really exquisite stuff. So it's custom quilted, but not a lot of the quilting is going to show. And you see here in this picture how tiny those little pieces are. So the scale is one of the things that dictated the quilting scheme. This is why stabilizing is important, to get out of messes like that. At this point, I was well into stabilizing. And this is toward the bottom of the quilt. The farther I quilt down, the more chance there is for the quilt top to have done some stretching. So there's quite a bit of fullness in here to deal with. I have used a ruler to measure, not to get numbers, but to see if the lines are straight. So when I straightened up the bottom border, that's when I saw a little bit of fullness here at the bottom to work out. And the more I stabilize, the more that fullness gets taken up. So I ditch quilted as usual around, well, in between the outer border and the frame. In between blocks, I've outline quilted the appliqué. And at this point, well, let's see. I stabilized using clear thread. I use a super skinny clear thread on top and a decent polyester thread in the bobbin. So you're not going to see any of the ditch quilting, but it provides an incredibly important purpose here. It's going to keep this thing nice and straight. So here I'm outlining the applique and embroidery. This block features both. So I'm quilting right up against the edge. This is like ditch quilting, only not. And I'm going around the perimeter to start out with, and then I'll go back in and fill in some places. There will be a little bit of backtracking, not too much, and that will be imperceptible, which is what you want. This block is pretty large. There are others just like it that are smaller. Those will have a tiny bit less quilting, but largely the same. And the quilting here will be very, very simple. It's just outlining of the applique itself. Later on, I'll go back and change thread and do some background quilting. So, as I said at the outset, not a lot of quilting is going to show on this quilt, which helped to dictate our game plan. You know, scale is one thing. You'll see the closer we get to looking at the embroidery, how tiny it is. And that would normally dictate the size of the background quilting and that kind of thing. But most of the quilting is not going to be really heavy. So I'm not going to pile the quilting on hardly anywhere. Even the background quilting will be kind of, it'll be relatively sparse. So here I'm using pins to be like a temporary stabilization, and that will help keep the fabric in place until I get that ditch quilting done. That is a good way to manage fullness. If you'll let the presser foot do its job and the pins do theirs, this will all even out without pleats or puckers. It's not going to look like anything was eased. See there, and I pushed the fabric up without pleating. That's working very nicely. Okay, so here's some fullness. And I'm going to get my ruler back out and make sure I've got a straight line happening there. I like to use pins to pull the fabric up or down, whichever way it needs to go. And then if I need to, pin the fabric in place before I begin quilting. This has all come with years and years and years of experience. So here are some of those little blocks I was talking about. One thing I learned a long time ago was it's generally best, or at least I found it was, to quilt the vertical lines before the horizontal. But of course, there are always going to be exceptions to that. And this quilt, you know, was an exception. Sometimes you just have to do the horizontal lines first. I'm going to pin here like I did before attempting that vertical line of ditch quilting. Pushing the fabric up is going to help that line of stitching without pleating. It will counter effect the presser foot pushing the fabric down, and that will help it even out. The pins with those great big heads on them can really get in the way, so I like to take those out as soon as I possibly can. There's something about putting the ruler on top of one of those pins that'll just cause the whole thing to go awry. Not every time, but mostly. I like to have a variety of pins to use for this purpose. The batting in this project, I believe I used Hobbs 80-20, which is a bat I use a whole lot. It has enough loft to give me the payoff I need. And there was no advantage here on this quilt to go after a higher loft bat. And now we'll go after that bottom edge, and we'll watch all that fullness just disappear. So here I'm ditch quilting around those little hexagons. I ditch quilted around the middle one and then around the perimeter. And I debated long and hard. Do I want to quilt anything in the middle? I felt sure I would, but in the end, I didn't. I mean, you certainly could, but for as little quilting as there was going to be elsewhere, I think that just would have been a little bit too much. They're small enough that I think they can stand alone, and that's a good way to feature the beautiful fabric. All right, so on these blocks, I'm ditch quilting here, and then I outlined the little tiny hand embroidery. And here I also debated, am I going to leave the backgrounds unquilted or put something in there? The quilting on this quilt is really simple and straightforward, but there are so many different components that it took a long time to do. And in the end, I decided the backgrounds could just be empty. They're small enough that it's not going to be detrimental to leave them unquilted. That's not too big of a space to leave unquilted. And I didn't quilt all over all of the embroidery here, just mainly around the perimeter and in between some of the elements. I did not quilt obsessively here. This is my favorite way to quilt embroidery. I'm rather attached to it. I think this is the best thing all the way around. When you quilt right around the embroidery, it makes it stand up, and that's what you want. Let's feature that embroidery, all that beautiful, really nice handwork that this client does. Now for this block, there's a little bit of fullness in there to manage. So I'm quilting around the perimeter of the piecing. Not being very precious with it. So I'm pretty well freehanding that line of stitching as though it was appliqué. I think, in fact, it is appliqué. I think she appliquéed those pieces on as opposed to piecing them by machine. I'm nudging the fullness of the fabric there, helping the block out so it'll be nice and flat. Patting and pushing fabric around is a big part of my job. I think that's really interesting. So I'm going after the perimeter, or the inside, rather. I'm wearing the camera, basically. So in the part of the shot where the machine is out of frame, I can't really control where it's going. I'm just doing my best, which is what I'm doing when I custom quilt anyway, just doing my best. So there's just a little bit of fullness left here, and that's going to get absorbed by outline quilting the embroidery once again. Why don't I go ahead and do the background quilting now? Well, that's a matter of a thread change, so that has to come later on. And here's a look at these other little blocks. Aren't they just delightful? I love these little things. So, like the hexie blocks, I'm ditch quilting around the center. Fast and loose with the free hand, not using rulers or anything because they're so small. And then I'm going around each one of these patches on the outside. And these got quilted really quickly. See how if you'd used a solid color thread, you'd have contrasting thread everywhere. With this many different fabric colors and prints and things, you know, that's where I want to use a clear thread just to get the whole thing done expeditiously and invisibly. And here's the little miniature version of the block we quilted earlier. Pretty cute stuff. Okay, back to this block. Oh yeah, okay. So why am I hopping around? That's a matter of thread changes. You can see on the left, I've cross-hatched those squares. I used an Omni polyester thread. The color name is Cookie Dough. It's a really pale yellow that looks, like a really creamy, buttery cookie dough. It's a really useful thread color. It blends with all sorts of things. So I used rulers for the cross-hatching on the squares, but here on these little patches, they're small enough that I'm freehanding those straight lines. Which is a thing, when you first do it, you think, well, that's never going to work. But it does work. You need some experience behind you, but it's just not that hard. Not being precious about it. And that's a way to make it go really quickly. Because as I say, all these individual elements don't take forever, but you add them all up and the whole quilt was still time consuming, even though none of the quilting was very laborious. But that looks pretty wonderful. Really good payoff for not a lot of effort. Look at that great texture. And that thread color blended with all of these fabrics really well. So what to do in this frame? I thought, let's do a little zigzag. I like the texture. I'm always after contrast. I don't want things together that are too much alike, because then it doesn't look like anything. Opposites tend to work out really well. So I like the texture this imparts. I like that the straight lines look really good with that curvy embroidery and applique. I knew there were probably going to be curves in the background quilting, so I wanted something straight line, but here the matter of scale is going to be different. It's a little tiny back and forth, so it's not a long linear thing. They're not long straight lines, they're short little zigzag lines. And this is fast and fun, freehand. I wouldn't want to waste time marking. My quilt mentor, Linda Taylor, said back in the very beginning, a couple decades ago, trust yourself. This is all going to work out. And it pretty much does. I don't have to do the math there. So in this big chunky frame around this little embroidery, I also wanted something fast and simple. So I went after my trusty old friend orange peel. That goes by lots of different names. So this is really simple. I looked at some rulers, and as usual, they're always all the wrong size. So I thought, I'm just going to freehand it. So I went for it. You're making an almond shape in the corner, and then from one corner to the next, you make a great big arc. You aim for the middle at the highest point, and then you go back and add more curves. So it's a whole bunch of orange peels. And they're different sizes. Some are really long and others are shorter and fatter. But it's easy, and you have to trust yourself there again. Pretty effective. So it's quilted, but it's not anywhere. It's so not over quilted. And it's pretty good. All right. So in the medallion of the quilt, Since I had cross-hatched all those squares, I thought, well, let's just put some more cross-hatching in here. And I didn't know what I was going to end up with. It's experimental, so let's just get some done and see where that leaves us. I didn't know how dense I wanted it all to be. But this is where you can have a lot of fun playing with the geometry. With geometry, things tend to work themselves out. Just connect the dots and see where it takes you and see what's going to happen. This was fun and satisfying to do. I'd already ditch quilted around that hexagon with the embroidery and then outlined the embroidery and ditch quilted all around the medallion, so it was nice and stable. So now with the ruler, I'm just putting in some straight lines. I did not get the great benefit of being able to race around and quilt the whole thing all at once. I had to stop and advance the quilt. You end up at an end where you kind of have to stop or the bobbin runs out. So there were a few stops and starts. And then I had to make up my mind. Is that enough? Do I want more? And how do you know when you're done? Kind of a judgment call. Am I liking where it's going? And what, if anything, to do with those little blue squares? I could have cross-hatched those, and there wouldn't have been anything wrong with that. That would have been a lot more work for not too much payoff. And in the end, I left them blank. I mean, look how wonderfully fussy cut those little bouquets are. So they did not require any quilting. So I don't know about you, but at this point I'm thinking that's not going to be enough. It needs a little something else, and I'm really not exactly quite sure what. So in the end, I decided it needs another line or two. And so I bisected the whole patch and really like how that looks. That to me looks like enough quilting. I like that whole medallion a lot. So with that done, there's that interesting little funny shaped frame, and I needed something versatile here. So I opted for a loop meander. With loops, you can make them little, you can make them big, you can double the loop, you can make it really sparse or tightly packed. And so I'm putting like 3 small loops and then 1 great big loop, and kind of changing the direction that the loops go in. Here's a better, closer look. And that looks delightful. I am loving the way that looks. Whole lot of payoff without very much work at all. I think that's gorgeous. It's a little playful, and it's a nice bit of contrast up against all those straight lines. There's another blue frame of the same fabric, this one close to the perimeter. I almost put a loop meander in there, and then I thought, it just needs this wavy line. It's too big to leave unquilted, but this is all it needed, just a little something or other. That looks really good. Then in the border, all right, so the client knew ahead of time she wanted to scallop the border. And so we visited about that ahead of time, and she figured out, how she wanted that shape to go and marked it for me. So I quilted right on it, which will make it easier come binding time. And this print is, even though the background of it is a light color, it still isn't going to show the quilting hardly at all. So I opted for an overall loop meander in here because I knew that would go really fast. And the loop meander here was one reason why I didn't loop meander the frame, because I don't want two things that are alike right next to each other. Straight lines would have been really good looking in this border had you wanted to put forth all that effort. That would have looked really, really nice, but it would have slowed the project down considerably. And lots of other meanders would work, just whatever you have up your sleeve would be good. So that's getting this thing done. And then we can move on to the backgrounds. So for those backgrounds, there's the background around the applique itself, and then there's this light colored space in between frames. So do we want to busy it up some more? I don't think so. What would be good contrast up against that zigzag is going to be a pair of long lines that just outline the frame. And I normally, want to do something really showy in the white space, but this is kind of an exception. You don't need it. There's so much happening in this quilt already. There is no need to gild this lily. And the straight lines are going to frame it up really nicely. I knew that was going to look really pretty. Simple, straightforward, and most important, really good contrast. I could have chosen any number of different ways to do even this. The lines can be spaced evenly, or they can be two lines really close together down the middle. I could have done 3 lines. Lots of different options. There's no need to mark these lines. I didn't do any measuring. I'm just estimating by eye here. And using the lines on the ruler helps a lot. So the thread I've switched to here is a white, or maybe it's an off-white, I'm not sure, I don't recall. It's So Fine by Superior. That's a great thin polyester thread. You could quilt a whole quilt with it, or it's skinny enough to use for just background quilting. For background quilting, you don't really want a heavier thread. You want something spindly. That looks nice and orderly. So now let's go after the background of this applique. Kind of small, but not teeny tiny. I'm doing swirls and echoing them, and throwing in some circles and echoing that. So that's pretty much what that background looks like. It's a favorite default background. Look how cute that is already. And I opted not to do any quilting inside the embroidery. I just didn't think it needed it. I mean, you could, but think of how many stops and starts that would have been for not that much payoff. We're doing a lot of quilting, but we're not piling on by any stretch. I could have put in some little flowers and stuff, but honestly, there's so many in the quilt already, it doesn't need it. The fabric is doing the heavy lifting here. This background can be done on a really small scale. I've kept it to, well, the rule of thumb to my mind is the background quilting needs to be smaller than the motifs it surrounds. If you make it the same size as the applique, it's not going to look, I mean, all you'll see is all this. That will give you a level of sameness that does not satisfy because there isn't enough contrast. Now, you could use the same sort of approach to the background quilting as an overall design, and that's when you would want to make the elements bigger than they are here. Okay, we're getting there. In the background here, the same concept applies. The inside of the block is going to get some little round quilting. So the outside probably needs some straight lines. And so this is getting concentric squares. And what you're going to end up with is what is called elbow quilting. So in each corner, there'll be like a quarter of a square over and over. And they get, the size will naturally get smaller and smaller. So it'll make a wonderful frame for the curved piecing. A straight line is a powerful thing. You can do all kinds of different things with them. And this may look like it's going fast, but it does take some effort. It takes up some time. I like to travel along the ditch quilting to get from one place to the other, just to expedite matters and limit the number of stops and starts. And boy, that looks great already. It's straight lines up against straight lines next to the crosshatch squares, but they don't look alike, so that's still good contrast. I like the scale, how close together these lines are. They're about, I don't know, they're not a quarter inch apart, maybe like 3/8. If you just put one in there, that's going to look like you're not trying, because you're not. The multiples of lines make it look really good. For the background of this embroidery, I'm doing, I don't know if this has a name. It's a little lacy circular design. It's almost like a swirl, but you're not swirling. You make a curl and then backtrack along your line. And you make a curl in this direction, and then you backtrack and, quilt it in the opposite direction. This gets you a background quilted without being too dense. It's pretty feminine. It's lacy. It's curly. It's cute. It's a really cute one. And depending on how big you make those little curls, you can keep it in scale with whatever it is you're surrounding. So see how tiny the embroidery is? This needed to be kind of little, not microscopic, but great big would defeat the whole purpose. And it goes fairly quickly, and it's fun. It's good practice for backtracking. I'm not a natural line follower myself, so it's a little bit of a fun challenge to quilt right over what you just quilted and, try to be as exact as possible. Not that it matters, because I don't think it does. I think that's great looking. It's a nice counterpart to that embroidery. So now we're headed down the back stretch here. This is the last element that I quilted, and mainly because I didn't know what I wanted to do. See, the embroidery here is tiny. I mean, it is so small. And there's enough background fabric there that it needed something. I wasn't willing to do any more straight lines here. And I thought, well, I could quilt some little flowers in there. You know, just sprinkle in a few flowers and call it a day. And then I thought, no, let's just add a bunch of little bitty leaves and tendrils and curls and that kind of thing and see where that gets me. So the scale isn't exactly what I want. The leaves are kind of big in proportion to the embroidery. But, you know, we take liberties, as it were, when we quilt sometimes, because, you know, you can't always get the scale to scale. So I tried for some adequate coverage while trying to be kind of sparse about the leaves. And I've started and stopped them in different places so it doesn't look like I'm going in a big circle. You see how the embroidery emanates from the center. So that's what I wanted the quilting to do as well. You know, that would be a much more harmonious design scheme. So that was worth the effort of stopping and starting in different strategic places. I think that is darling. This is a good place to put in your frilly flourishes. And there were 4 of these. So by the time you get to the 4th one, you're kind of worn out. But I think that looks great. I'm very pleased with it. What a nice quilt this is going to turn out to be. In this frame, we get a glimpse at the background quilting of the little hexagon blocks underneath. And so what I did there was outline those hexes and then go back in and do the same background quilting I did in some other blocks. All right, so this is where we stand back and admire and say, look, didn't we do a great job there? That is so pretty. It's a delightful quilt all the way around. The client was really happy. The quilter is really happy. I hope this was helpful. And we'll see you next time. Who knows what I'll have up my sleeve then.